Hey everybody, this is Wintermute coming to you from the think tank, and today we're going to go into technology for Russia. Now, we'll start off with the number of factories that Russia has to start the game, or major factories that Russia starts the game with. They have three, so they have three tech dice right from the beginning, which is pretty good. And then you have this medium factory here that if you want to spend the 6 IPP to upgrade, gives them 4 dice. So, they can really go, they can almost go toe-to-toe with Germans in terms of the number of tech rolls they get a turn, even early on. Now, one thing, though, is spending the 6 IPP to upgrade this early on is a lot more difficult for the Russians to do because they only get those 8 IPP a turn for several turns. So they really have limited, economy, military resources at the beginning of the game. They only have what's on the board, and building it up over time just really is difficult for them because of they just start off with such a limited amount of IPP each turn. But you do have to ask yourself, is this something you want to do right away, or do you want to wait a little bit? Now, after that, in kind of the longer play, you have 3 small factory or minor factories already on the board. Now, if you're going to upgrade one of them to a major, the one over here is, in my opinion, probably your best bet, because it's away from the front. These other 2 are probably going to get overrun at some point, assuming that you're playing against a German player who has some idea what they're doing, and their dice don't go completely cold. You may want to either just consider blowing them up with Scorched Earth, or when you can, if you can, rail them out of there if they even survive that long. But they... those front 2 and even Orel Kursk here, you can probably assume that you're going to lose them at some point. Moscow is more likely to hold out. Leningrad and Stalingrad are more likely to hold out. But if, things don't go well for the Germans, 2 out of those 3 can fall pretty quickly. So it's a matter of just kind of, deciding what you're going to do as far as upgrading your factories in the long term. Now, of course, upgrading this factory makes it a juicy target for the Japanese if they want to go ahead and backstab Russia and come up the back. It's not an easy thing for them to do because they basically, if they're starting, in the territory that they start with, they got to slog through all this to get there. But it might be something that they want to kind of reevaluate doing to help out the Germans and take that factory from Russia, or even just strategically bomb it. And I actually go more into that when I talk about Japan, when I'll get the chance to talk about Japan and their strategy. But so that's where Russia stands with the number of factories it has and the factories that they start on the board with. Again, at least early on, you're probably not going to build more minor factories because you just don't have a whole... I mean, that's an entire turn right there just to do that. And unless you've got a specific strategy for why you'd want to do that, it's just probably not worth it for the Russians to do that early on. So now, in some ways, they're in the same boat as Germany, only more one-sided. When you look at the tech list, you're going to kind of see, well, here's the ground stuff and here's the not ground stuff. And the not ground stuff can kind of be chucked in the bin because, let's face it, if you're playing Russia and you're seriously considering taking some of these naval techs, you've probably already won the game. Because, they will be locked in land wars, and that's kind of the crux of their entire thing. That doesn't mean that their navies are useless and shouldn't be considered, and there might be reasons to build a naval unit here or there just to be a thorn in the side of Japan or Germany, but realistically, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of the land-based technologies than you are anything naval-based. So with that said, kind of like with the Germans, advanced artillery, advanced mech infantry, and heavy armor are all good options. Advanced artillery, that also gives you the option of building Katyusha rockets, which are well worth the money you can spend on them. Well worth it. Great stats for what they cost, and basically they're advanced artillery in all other regards. Advanced mech infantry, maybe not as high a priority, but it's still, Russia can have the opportunity to counter blitz. They can build, they have more than enough resources to kind of husband their tanks and kind of maybe put them into a position where they see an opportunity to counter blitz into the German line, and cut them off from their supply path to Germany and things like that. So with that in mind, advanced mech has its place in that kind of strategy if that opportunity presents itself. But it's probably not as high a usefulness overall as, say, advanced artillery or heavy armor, in just being useful across the board. And heavy armor, of course, is always a solid choice for them. Gives you a chance to really hit back at their armor early on, and it's just good stats. Gives you an opportunity to continue to blitz heavily later on when the opportunity presents itself. Jet fighters, they're a decent choice too. Now we know historically the Russians were more about quantity over quality when it came to a lot of their aircraft. Now they certainly had great aircraft at the end of the war. Don't get me wrong, but leading up to that point, it was just get something out there that works so we can continue to fight. That maybe you may go ahead and just say, well, I don't need jet fighters as much. I just need fighters. You just have to do the math and crunch the numbers and see which one you think is better. But jet fighters are a decent choice for Russia as well. Heavy strategic bombers, probably not a high priority. Russia is in the position where it is not going to spend as much time trying to strategically bomb or grind the IPPs away from Germany by attacking their factories and their infrastructure so much as defeating them in the field. That's really where Russia kind of is going to cause Germany to economically collapse. Is they constantly are winning battles or forcing the Germans into battles where they're taking horrendous casualties. That's where they're going to grind away those resources from them. So a heavy strategic bomber, you're probably not even going to have much opportunity to use it, with the exception possibly being the factory in Romania or Poland. But even those are still, depending on how deep the Germans go, they can be really far from the front. So I just don't see them being particularly useful for Russia. And while the carpet bombing, has the potential to inflict 5 casualties for free, basically, it's not a high hit percentage. So I wouldn't rely on that. I think you're going to get more money, more mileage out of, like I said before, the first 4 techs that I mentioned. Then we come down to long-range aircraft, and that's not a terrible choice for Russia either. I don't know if it's the first one it's probably not the first one I would go for, but it isn't horrible either, because they're still going to want to have air power backing up their ground units so they can do proper counterattacks during the turns. And they may need to build a bunch of fighters to go ahead and intercept and things like that, which kind of brings us down to radar. Unlike Germany, where I showed how the airfields kind of interlink and can really help defend, and the air bases being able to scramble unlimited of fighters, Russia really isn't in that same position. Their air bases don't overlap like Germany does. They do in some areas, like some specific zones, but overall, you may want to actually consider radar so that you can scramble fighters if the German player is really bombing your factories every turn and really just eating up your resources that way. So I wouldn't say radar is off the table, but probably not a high priority either, and probably a little more situational. Long range aircraft is good, but again, you're going to get more mileage out of these ground units, I feel. Then we get to advanced subs. It's a naval unit. The only thing I'll say about these advanced naval units for Russia is if you're playing the expansion where the Cold War turns hot right after World War II, well, maybe they do want those then because they need some way of countering the huge navies of the Allies. But other than that, you're just kind of gonna shrug it at all these naval ones. Strategic rockets, probably not a good choice either for the same reason you wouldn't take heavy strategic bombers. The attrition attack just it doesn't hit reliably enough to make it worth it. You might be able to take a couple pot shots at those factories near the front, but that's about it. So again, not a high priority. And there's nothing else on the board that's kind of particularly tricky with how things are laid out in terms of, well, if I get those rockets and I put them here, well, then I can just shell the crap out of it. It just really, Russia just isn't in a position like that, like I showed with Britain and Germany, who can, rocket each other pretty effectively. We already went over radar. And of course, wartime economy is probably your first pick. Just an average of 7 more IPPs a turn is 2 more infantry and a buck. So who doesn't want 2 more infantry and a buck a turn? Improved factories. Now, this is probably a good choice for Russia for a lot of the same reasons it's a good choice for Germany. They will probably lose their factories at some point. They will either have to destroy them themselves, Germany will take them from them, or they're going to skip a turn while they're moving them across the board to a more safer area. So if you have improved factories, the factories that aren't moving can put out more units to make up for the fact that the factories that are moving can't produce that turn. It also allows you to stack, just throw a ton of units into an area that maybe you suddenly didn't realize was going to be as threatened as it was. Because it's perfectly reasonable that, you think you're good with your defensive line, but the German player rolls in, blows through that line, starts blitzing, and the next thing you know, they're sitting right outside of Leningrad way sooner than you thought they would be. And you suddenly are like, uh-oh. I need to get units there as much as possible. So if you've got improved factories, you're not just putting 5 guys there, you're putting 8 guys there, which can be a huge swing and be the deciding factor whether or not he's even going to try to attack at that turn. So, again, and some of these factories like Novosibirsk and, places like that are a little more remote, even if you never upgrade that one, well, at least you're doubling its effectiveness. In what it can put out a turn. So I think improved factories is a perfectly reasonable choice for Russia. Improved construction, not so much. You might want to go ahead and upgrade your factories later in the game as opposed to earlier in the game, so you're more likely to get that bonus for the cost reduction. You're probably gonna, I wouldn't be surprised if you decide you need to put out some airfields in the backfield based on where the front kind of settles in. But aside from that, you probably won't even have the time to build many fortifications or things like that, even in some strategic areas, because, again, Russia starts off with really weak money. They just don't have a lot of money to spend on the military to start with. And later on in the game, if you start building a fortress or something like that, they're probably going to come at you right away to make sure that never finishes. Because fortifications still take 2 turns to build. And then some of these other facilities you can build, the ports, the shipyards, the dockyards, there may be a completely reasonable reason to upgrade them or build some additional ones. To make sure that Lend-Lease is coming in and things like that, or to help the Allies possibly repair some of their ships and things like that. Actually, you know what? I don't know whether Comintern can do that in this edition. I will have to double check that. But you get my point. There may be a reason to go ahead and build other naval facilities, but probably not. So improved construction is probably just not going to save you a whole lot in the long run. You're not going to get a whole lot of mileage out of it. And then that brings us to basically the 3, the heavy battleship, the carrier, and the transport. It just, why are you going to bother? And out of these 3, only one, and again, for some of the same reasons I spoke about with Germany, is maybe the attack transport. Maybe Germany gets so beat up and they're on the run that you can go ahead and you can drop an attack transport along with a couple escort ships, and then start threatening the rest of Scandinavia, northern Germany, and start threatening their backfield up there. Sure, that's something to consider. Or maybe you build them down in Crimea and you go ahead and start threatening amphibious landings in Bulgaria and Romania. Yeah, okay, I can see that in a late game, but the odds of that actually finding yourself in a situation where that becomes a feasible thing, I don't see that really having a high likelihood of happening. But it's not like I said, nothing's completely off the table. It's just you're just not going to get the kind of anything naval related. You're just probably not going to use. Russia does not start off with a strong navy. Even if they took all of their navy and could consolidate it into the North Sea, north of Germany or something like that, it still isn't that impressive. And Germany could just take it out with what it has. But it's not even concentrated. It's spread out across the board. You've got some in the Black Sea, some in the North Sea, some over there on north of Japan. So the Axis can just sort of pick it apart as they want if it ever poses any sort of threat. If you feel I'm misassessing that, then feel free to bring that up and let me know. And that's kind of it for Russia. They're pretty simple and straightforward. Like I said, it's all about land and what you think is going to get you the most bang for your buck when it comes time to put that tech into the field. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. And again, if you think I'm wrong or you think I missed something, let me know in the comments, and we'll get a good discussion going.